to be on the world stage and you can't think of the words that you want.
Yeah.
I totally get it. But you know what? If you're talking to people like us, we all understand. Like me, are just so bad.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So,
Yeah.
that's your forward button.
Yep.
So good morning to you.
Good morning.
How are you today?
Yeah. Live stream.
Well, you could just tell me one little bit.
This morning I'm just feeling a little nauseous.
Oh, how come?
Still got it.
I didn't know. Oh my gosh. Oh, what?
At the college. The guys asked me.
It's hard for you. How pregnant are you?
Balance is a little.
How much is much?
About 4.
Should.
I wrote it to class.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
When we get to that minute, I'll be able to.
So how are you?
How are you?
I was gonna-
Fine, how are
I
you?
couldn't find you. Oh, sweetie pie. You were in the babies get born.
Let me do it.
Oh, in the back.
Yeah, you can study.
And then I realized you didn't care. She never could short people behind me.
I think I'm the youngest, I believe.
So what are you doing? Well, no, you know, he used to be a doctor, and he used to be.
Sorry, fixing dinner.
He just is a neighborhood dinner out there. That's nice. That's nice. Any help during the night?
When we had our last party, my surgery on it.
Oh, really? Last one.
That's the link, John.
Don't ask me.
Good morning.
Good
Not too bad, you? Yeah.
Really hard, like how do you do high expectations. Yeah. How are you? Well, at least for now you.
Can you do?
Buddy, at this point,
Oh, so you
I don't know, I may or may not.
I have a grandson.
When I put those pictures, well, this is.
How are you doing? Tomorrow morning. I've been in Chicago last night. It's a small crap.
You're done.
And
I don't know, I may or may not. Let me know. Transmitted may come up. I received it. Somebody would say 25.
I guess it's because it's told to sign on. I read this page.
Yes, I
Is there an answer?
I've been accepted. I got
Hey, sis.
I'll get you more.
Don't worry, he was just telling me he flunked through it, and I said, you better tell John, because John's waiting.
I did
Oh, okay.
I did tell you.
You know T is pretty with.
Congratulations and condolences all at the same time.
Yes, you do. You got probably got. Well, I realized.
She's got three. Three at home, right?
Yeah, you're right. It's nice to be able to go.
Yeah, she was right. She's gonna need those things.
This year, it's been. We work. Yeah. Miss Buell, Miss Point.
Ready for this one, Gary.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, those are the
Not too bad. It's better pregnancy with my daughter.
Yeah. Quarterback at Clemson.
How are you?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. Very successful.
Mom is like, I'm like, I don't know if I wanted it to be. They're coming, so we're excited.
So what do you have in tomorrow? And do something to replace.
I'm not just
Where far away?
I live in like North Charlotte, so it's
Well, maybe we can have a course.
Yes,
I'm nervous. My due date is, I know they told me, my birthday is April 1st, so I'm really like,
and hopefully I have I watched it.
Morning. Good morning.
Cameron and Thomas. That's at Charleston.
Good morning. Stairs wear me out. I take it up over here. And I didn't want
For me,
I watched the little first visit. It looks like
whether I have it. No, see, I stand these plans. Everybody else here. I thought I was going to be able to. Yeah, I thought that I was.
Okay. But then, you know, right to the right. Anyway, I haven't.
Oh, no. Really? You know, it's a whole other level of complication with that. Weed is good, because
We did. Well, you must have, you got out of there good guys. What else is new?
Yeah, I got one. You have the largest one. I have two.
We don't have.
One is the double strand.
We don't have.
This one's a single.
We had some iron.
Yeah, I did one. I bet I could have sold it 3 times over.
So you still have plenty of the first one.
Yeah, that's Arizona years
The
ago.
next one will be again in, Arbor Day.
We are at 9:46.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. Well, I'm happy to know. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Colors.
Time to start.
Oh, it's time to start.
It's a pleasure to welcome Gordon Clark, whom all of you know probably, to be with us this morning to talk a little bit about trees. And keeping with our conservation theme from last week, I asked Gordon if he wouldn't be willing to talk about his work. Some of it with Trees Davidson, and he'll tell you a little bit about that. But without saying anything further, Gordon, it's all you.
Can everybody hear me okay? I'm not used to all this. Usually when I talk about trees, it's with a bunch of high school kids out in the fields because we're getting ready to plant trees. But I'm very honored and privileged feel very honored and privileged to be here this morning because my wife and I joined this congregation 30 years ago. And I have gone to the Covenant class for many years. And I got to tell you, we used to run the Inn in town. And I tell people, if you want really high quality Sunday school, go right across the street because we have, I think about some of the Sunday school classes I've gone to. We've got, some of them right here. I remember when Tony talked about the trip that you all did to the Middle East. And he said, the phrase I remember is as a writer, he said, he needed to shed the dust of Davidson. And so hopefully today I can gather the trees of Davidson and help me on this talk that I'm going to do. One of the things that I wasn't quite sure how to tell this story was what angle I wanted to come at it. So I said, do we want to talk about the hunter story? And we're going to try technology here and see how it works. Then I wasn't sure. Maybe we want to talk about technology. There it is. Oops, see, I just skipped right past it. Do we need to point this at something? Okay. Well, it went right past it. You saw. Maybe I need to talk about the overstory. This is what I thought we needed to talk about. So if you can click on that link for me, and let's see where this takes us.
I love your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My wife got me that before. Now I got to get to. Okay, okay, there we go. So I told you this was going to be a challenge. So I wanted to tell a love story, okay? Because for me, I think where I really started to realize my love for trees was we moved back here to North Carolina after I lived 10 years in Southern California, which has some amazing trees, but it's not anything like what I was used to growing up on the East Coast. And I started to kind of watch as change happened in our town here. I watched some of these beautiful oak trees that line Concord Road disappearing or getting sheared up by Duke Power. And I felt like I wanted to do something to try to, preserve our tree canopy and protect it. And so that's kind of how I got involved in this love story. And so now I decided, you can see, that I'm not the only one that feels this way about trees. You can get on the internet and find lots of pictures about trees. Okay? But more importantly, I thought today what we could do is talk about trees in the context of our faith. And so, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, right from the beginning, we find that trees are right there. On the third day, God's command to the earth was to bring forth vegetation, and he initiates the process of life, which will be self-sustaining. Hence, emphasis on seed of every kind. The vegetation will propagate its kind on earth through its seed. So it's right in the beginning of the Bible we start to hear about trees. The other account of creation is a little bit different. In that account, the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put man whom he had formed. Out of the ground the Lord God made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So I don't have to tell you all about those stories, and we kind of know how they turned out. Thankfully, the fig tree did come to the rescue, and now we know where bathing suits, kind of the idea for bathing suits came from. But in my research, I found that other than people and God, trees are the most mentioned living thing in the Bible. There are trees in the first chapter of Genesis, as we just talked about, and there are trees on the last page of Revelation. Every major character and every major theological event in the Bible has an associated tree. The only exception to this pattern is Joseph. And in Joseph's case, the Bible pays him a high compliment. Joseph is a tree. In fact, Jeremiah urges all believers to be like a tree, and so does Psalms 1. The only physical description of Jesus in the Bible occurs in Isaiah, and that says they want to recognize the Messiah when he arrives. Look for the man who resembles a little tree growing out of the barren ground. So trees are very much a part of the Bible. Not just our tradition, but all other traditions, trees play a very prominent role. In the Jewish teaching, the Torah is called the tree of life. In the mystical tradition, the tree of life refers to the well-known diagram illustrating the 10 divine emanations, which is that smaller diagram that you see there. In the Quran, the tree of immortality is kind of the tree of life motif. And in the Quran, it's used as an example or for a concept, an idea, a way of life, or a code of life. A good idea, concept is a good tree. A bad idea is a bad tree. In Hindu mythology, the tree of life is known as Akshaya Vata, which means immortal tree, and refers to the banyan tree. The banyan tree is associated with multiple Hindu gods, and it represents one's spiritual aspirations and detachment from materialism. The banyan tree is also regarded in Buddhism as it is believed that Gautama Buddha sat under the tree for 7 days after he attained enlightenment to absorb his newfound realization. Oops. Now it's working and I'm going too fast.
Just small leg.
All right. There it is. Light touch. In many indigenous cultures, we know that trees were always important symbols of values, of spiritual beliefs, of traditions, hopes for the future. A cedar tree can represent cleansing, the birch tree can represent truth, an elm tree can represent wisdom, and a white pine can represent unity and peace. Boy, I'll get this right eventually. I skipped past the slide that really covered all of civilization. So the Assyrians, the Babylonians, you go back and trees are an amazing part of our history and our culture, all the way back to time. So when we talk about time, where do trees fit in the historical timeline? Well, we know that the Earth is around 4.5 billion years old, and around 400 million years ago, the first fossil records of tree-like plants appear. These tree, the type of plants did not have seeds yet, but they were the first to have a vascular system, which allowed them to start to get higher and bigger. 360 million years ago, we find the first fossil records of gymnosperms. So gymnosperms are conifers that we see. So those were the first ones really. It says the first evidence of ginkgo trees, which were some of the oldest trees, 200 million years ago. And then about 125 million years ago is when we find fossil records of the angiosperms, which really kind of grew our tree canopy. And those are the ones that bear seeds and flowers, and the ones that we've really kind of come to see as a lot of our tree canopy here. Evidence of the first maple tree 67 million years ago, the first oak trees 56 million years ago, and then of course mankind didn't come until 1.8 million years ago. So trees have been here a long time. I feel pretty hopeless here. But,
So Gordon, just before you leave that, would you go over that again? I mean, when was the first little seed discovered before the ginkgo? I mean, my eyesight isn't as good as it used to be. So I'm having a...
So this is a slide that I pulled up that basically tried to put some context into where trees fit into the history of Earth.
Yeah.
And so 400 million years ago is when they first had our first kind of tree. And then these are all based on fossil records. So the first trees were the conifers. Does that clarify anything?
So a conifer is like a pine tree.
Yeah.
Then comes a ginkgo, which loses its leaves.
Yeah. A ginkgo is one of the oldest trees after the conifers. But compared to the ones that we're more used to, like the maple trees and oak trees and all those, much older are the ginkgo trees.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
If I look at that, I see the sponges and the corals in 500 million years ago.
Mhm.
Is that correct? Now, we live in Isle of Man, Vermont, where the fossilized reef, do you know about that reef? Okay, and we've been told that those fossils go back 460 million years ago. And we were told that those were some of the earliest examples of colonized life on the planet. You're saying it goes back to project.
Well, so honestly, you're out of my expertise. We did have a geologist here last week that maybe could speak more to that. I tried to kind of put trees in the context of history. All right, so let's see where we are. I don't know exactly what's going on, but so I think this is right. One of the things that I thought was really interesting when I was digging around on all this was this book that talks about how a dendrochronologist, okay, so this is a person who studies trees, but they study the trees through samples that they take of the tree rings. And they take out pieces of the tree, and they're able to, through their different processes, try to figure out what was happening in that particular year. And then what they do is they cross-reference that to other samples that they have and other information. And if we can get to the slide, she paints this very interesting picture of history through, the tree story. There it is. Okay. So it's Valerie Trouet, and see, there's the dendrochronologist. I did get that right. And she offers a unique perspective on the giant plants that invites readers to reconsider what we can learn about our planet, our past, and ourselves when we turn around to ask the trees. And so it's really a good book if you want not something that's just talking about trees, it's talking about human history and how trees can shed a light onto what was happening that maybe they don't have a lot of records. You know, trees are an amazing. You know, we have some trees in this in this country that are, we'll get to that, but are 5,000 years old. So they're okay. So speaking of which, the oldest single stem tree in the world is in South Africa, the baobab tree. I said that I would love to see one of those trees. They just look so kind of almost futuristic. Okay, so this is the oldest living tree or organism. It's the Methuselah. It's a bristlecone pine, and it's named after the longest living person in the Bible. And this tree is located in the Sierra Nevada range in California. Now, it doesn't really look much like a tree, but it's still living. You know, that's the thing about trees. Sometimes you don't think they're alive, but they still have active roots, and they're still alive.
How old is that tree?
That tree was, I want to say it was about 5,000 some years old. So this one I thought was really interesting because some of you maybe have even been here, or you've heard this story. There was a researcher that was doing some research here in North Carolina, and the Nature Conservancy set him up down in eastern North Carolina on the Black River. Has anybody been on the Black River? So my wife is from Elizabethtown, which is a hip and a holler down from the Black River. And so one time I dragged our, I think he was probably 10-year-old son on a kayak trip down the Black River. And it's a long story, but I will tell you it didn't end well. Unfortunately, the river that year was down. And so it wasn't so much a river as it was kind of a riverbed that we had to drag the kayak down from. And you know, this is the part that I get in trouble on these adventures, is that I get on the map and I say, well, I know we can put it in here, and then we can take it out there. And so Rebecca was my takeout person. She'd come drive and get us at the takeout point. But you know, a river doesn't just go like this. It goes like this, right? So you get back in there. 8 hours later, in the middle of the summer, we've run out of water. I'm begging for us to find this place where I'm supposed to take this thing out. And my son never has gone on a kayak trip with me, ever again. But these trees, these old growth trees, are on the Black River. So these are ancient bald cypress. And this professor from the University of Arkansas was trying to find relationships between tree growth rings and climate. Once again, trees kind of tell a story. And Dr. Stahl thought there were maybe trees much older along this section of the river. And in 2019, he announced that he had identified one cypress there that was at least 605 BCE, the time of the Babylonian Empire. So that's right here in our neck of the woods in North Carolina. He also found many other ancient trees, and these are some of the oldest trees in North America east of the Great Basin. So this is right here in our neighborhood, right in our backyard. And it is not that difficult to get on the Black River if you ever wanted to do it. So it is kind of, you know, with the Spanish moss, you know, and all the knees and everything, and the river really is black. So it may not be for everybody, but it is beautiful. He's not here today, but George Gable is my sequoia guy. You all probably know, some of you. He saw the sequoia sempervirens that we planted out at Abersham. And he said, well, what kind of tree is that, Gordon? I said, that's a sequoia. It's a sequoia. Wow. Okay. So him and one of his buddies drove all the way to Fuquay-Varina to pick up a sequoia that they could plant out at the Pines.
This is the buddy.
Oh, well, there he is. They even borrowed my old blue pickup truck, okay, and drove all the way.
It was hell.
Yeah. So
That's in the story sometimes.
yeah, it doesn't have air conditioning. It's kind of, but anyway. So he loves the sequoia, and you know, the sequoias these are not the same tree. This is Sequoia dendron giganteum, or giant sequoia. All right, largest tree on Earth. It can get up to 300 feet, 50 feet in diameter, and can live over 3,000 years. Those big trees can weigh up to 3 million pounds. And the largest bark in the world is up 2 to 3 feet, just the bark, you know, if you think about bark. But they really depend on forest fires to regenerate, and that bark protects them. It has a high concentration of tannin, which is an insoluble compound, so the trees are immune to a lot of diseases, and the fires don't harm the trees. Unless you get a case like we did this past year, where you have trees that were subject to high intensity fires. You know, the tree fires, the fires that used to happen in these habitats were often occurring naturally, or the Native Americans did it a lot. So it was very managed, where we got to the point where we thought, oh, we don't want to go in and disturb this habitat. And so a lot of this material built up. And then when you have a fire come through there, it's much more intense than the typical conditions. So that's where you get to some of these problems, where they had to kind of go in and try to save some of these great giant sequoia trees. Yes. Yeah, but so what I learned is that some of the sequoias can live fine here in North Carolina. North Carolina State has a great website that you can go to, and they have all these trees that they can tell you about and how they do here. And so the Sequoia sempervirens was one that they had on there, and just so happened that this nursery had one, and I said, well, let's try it. Kind of like what they did here on the college, right? all these trees are not native trees. I mean, we have trees from China here. I always like the scholar trees over, it seems to fit in fine, but they're really beautiful smaller trees kind of over, kind of behind the development homes. Those are scholar trees, just Chinese scholar trees. So, you know, when you have a place like this where, or an arboretum, which we'll talk about a little bit, they've just gotten approval to have an arboretum at the Pines. You can plant trees that aren't just all your native trees. You can have specimen trees or oriental trees. This is another example. I don't know how many of you know about this, but this is in Utah, and this is a grove of aspens. And what they found here that's really fascinating, it's called Populus tremuloides, common name being trembling aspen, and it's been found to be the largest organism on Earth. Okay, now it's not the tallest or the biggest tree, but it's a standard tree spreading over an area of 106 acres. 47,000 genetically identical stems is said to be one living organism. So they all have this common genealogy, and that's what kind of makes them one organism. So the trees lived 130 years old. The root system is 80,000 years old. So to me, this kind of reminds me of that movie. I don't know if you all, my kids joke about how much I like the Avatar movie. But I don't know if you know in that movie when Sigourney Weaver is out there in the jungle and they're doing all these tests, you know, and she says, all the trees are talking to each other, you know, and it's 1 to the millionth, you know, on how they're all kind of, to me, that kind of tells this story that, you know, sometimes you don't see it. You look at that grove of aspen and you don't realize that that's all part of the same living organism.
Are they connected by root, or are they not connected?
By roots. Yeah, you think about some of those plants where the roots go down and they're all kind of, you know, connected. That's how it is. It's all kind of interconnected to those roots.
So then, Gordon, it would be really susceptible to a disease.
Yeah.
Like one disease would just wipe the whole thing out.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you know, I think that, you know, the thing about that is nature is pretty good at kind of figuring those things out. So I don't know, you know, what defense that they would have, because they're all so similar and connected. One disease, you know, that's the thing we talk about when we do our tree plantings, is we say, right tree, right place, because, and diversity, you know, you don't want to plant all willow oaks along your path, because guess what happens if a willow oak blight comes in and you lose. So we try to do, just last week, we did, out at Fisher Farm, we did 4 different types of oak trees along the road as you go into the park. And if you look at our tree plantings, some of which we've done with the support of the Davidson Garden Club, we push diversity, tree diversity, which you can do to a limited extent. I go to some of these arboretums all over the place, and I say, oh boy, it would be great if we could get that tree or that tree, like the catalpa tree. I didn't even know about the catalpa tree until we were in Kew Gardens in the UK a couple of years ago, and I saw this beautiful tree, and I said, what is that? And it turns out that it's fairly common to the US, but I haven't been able to find any to plant.
Where I grew up in Oklahoma, we had what we call the parking. We had 2 catalpa trees on that.
It was beautiful. It was a beautiful tree. So this book, I think this is the gift that, that Dave gave to Sterling last week, but this researcher who spent a lot of time in the woods has some really interesting insights about trees. Gotta clear my throat here and hope that this thing advances. We were doing pretty good for a while there. I don't know what the trick is. If I mash it hard or if I... but anyway, I brought the book in. And he talks about this interconnectedness underneath the soil, mitochondria. All of these things that we don't necessarily, think about when we're walking through the forest. But I certainly can say I've experienced this when, I will confess that there were some trees back in the woods behind our house, and my wife said, well, why don't you get one of those trees and put it in our yard? And I'd go out to try to dig the tree up, and my gosh, the roots were like crazy. So, I said, forget that, because they're so interconnected under here. You might be able to get the tree out, but you're pretty much going to kill it if you get it out. So, forget that. Sorry about this. Okay, here we go. So this book has won a lot of awards, but basically he talks about trees as social beings. Dr. Wolben makes the case that the forest is a social network. And so this is through his research. Tree parents live together with their children. They communicate with them, support them as they grow, share nutrients with those who are sick or struggling, and even warn each other of impending dangers. So, that's pretty fascinating stuff if you read the book. So, he talks about trees over here can send a chemical signal to trees over here that the bees are coming, or a certain pest is coming. And they can immediately start to get their defenses going. So it's really fun to read. This is another book that we've kind of featured at DLC, and I don't know how many of you got to read this. I know a lot of you probably know this already, but this is Doug Tallamy, and he is a professor up in Maryland, I believe, and his big push is trying to get us out of this mindset of that our yards are not part of nature, of the bigger picture, right? So he says our privately owned land and ecosystem upon it are essential to everyone's well-being, not just our own. Abusing land anywhere has negative ramifications for people everywhere. And really, what he talks about is this connection between our developed world and what we put in it, right? If you think about a lot of what we put in it, it's sterile. A great example he uses in the book is crepe myrtles. We love crepe myrtles here. For the most part, they're pretty healthy. They're beautiful. They flower all summer. They have that beautiful bark, right? He said, well, you could think of crepe myrtles as golden statues because they have no wildlife benefit. Okay? So it's not really, it's a pretty tree. And we planted a lot of them. It's kind of like the old Bradford pears. Remember all the Bradford pears we used to have out at Pines, right? And everybody planted one, including me. Well, now the North Carolina State University will give you a free tree if you take down that Bradford pear, because it's invasive. All right? So I think what Dr. Tallamy talks about is really important because he's trying to get us to think not so much manicured lawns with plants and grass. Turf doesn't support much wildlife. So he's really trying to say, yeah, we know you want a place for your kids to go out and play, but take some of that turf out and put in some native plants. Put in some plants that are going to bring in pollinators, okay? Your kids will love that too. And they're more accustomed to our climate. They're probably easier to maintain. There's all these benefits, but what he's trying to get us to is kind of like this national park through all of our yards, where she has pollinators in her yard, and then down the street there's pollinators here, and so there's more habitat for wildlife, and that's really what we're losing, right? We're losing habitat. So a good book. I definitely recommend that one. One of the things that he points out in this book his favorite tree is the white oak. And the white oak is kind of the champion of oaks because it gets bigger, it lives longer. It has, if you look at the bark of a white oak, you know how it's kind of, call it shaggy maybe? So there's all this habitat for insects, caterpillars. And Tallamy, Dr. Tallamy, has this whole piece that he does on how insects and caterpillars support bird population. And certain birds want certain caterpillars, and certain caterpillars live in certain trees, so it's all specialized. And so he calls the white oak like the granddaddy of our deciduous trees because they support so much. That one I just had put in there because, you know, I mean, you don't think of habitat in the trees like that, but
Exactly.
yeah, we were doing pretty good there. See, Dave didn't have this problem.
I said it is a battery issue.
The battery's bad. I don't know.
Yeah.
Battery issue. That would be just my luck, wouldn't it? Excuse me, how far are we still? I still got time. Right? Okay. So, you know, the other thing that we haven't really talked about is all the things that we derive from trees, right? I mean, I didn't even do a slide on, if you think about human civilization, we built our ships out of trees, we built our habitats out of trees, medicinal trees. Think of all the things maybe that your grandmother, you know, they go out and they pull something off, or, you know, certainly the Native Americans, you know, use trees for medicinal purposes. These are some of the trees that maybe some of you are all familiar with. Trees is a source of food. I didn't even go there really on that. I mean, how many of us don't like all of our tree nuts and citrus and the list goes on. Right? Okay. So then I got into this whole thing of the spirit tree, right, in our culture. And oh my gosh, like I said, you can go way down this, but I don't know how many of you have stories about maybe, you know, growing up or something about a certain tree in your neighborhood or something, you know, or you know, maybe a family story about this tree. A great book to read if you like that is The Overstory, which kind of does that, weaves trees into this narrative with all these families and everything, and it's really, but it's something that is very much a part of our culture. These kind of spirit trees and how we connect to them. Okay, I skipped right past the one on the golf course. For any of you golfers, all right. Well, I mean, even on the golf course, this tree, of course, is in the not southeast U.S., world somewhere, but it was just trying to find all these trees that you feel like are telling the story. You probably have lived a long time. This was kind of interesting. I pulled this one up because it was talking about things that are common between trees and people, and there's a lot, you know, that's in common. So, but the website is for a living urn, which is after you pass away, you put your ashes in this urn, and I guess they put a tree in it, and so a tree grows out of your ashes. But if you look, they talk about some of the things that people and trees share. We're both made up of mostly water. We have similar physical characteristics. We have this symbiotic relationship, right? We exhale carbon dioxide and inhale oxygen. Trees do the reverse. So that to me is pretty critical. And so I think we have dived into that part of my research thus far. Now I decided I was going to put on my different hats here, and this one was last week, right? This is Davidson Lands Conservancy. We have some Davidson Lands Conservancy past presidents here, board members, supporters, all throughout this room, and that's kind of where my tree passion was housed, let's say, because the land conservation group welcomed, you know, our interest in trying to do work around trees in our community. So this is my lands conservation hat, and Dave would be be upset with me if I didn't do our 4 pillars, which I just flipped right by. Okay, 4 pillars, okay. 4 pillars. Y'all remember the 4 pillars? Okay, tell me the 4 pillars.
Greenways.
Greenways. Pam's gonna get them all. Okay, come on. Somebody besides Pam. Trees.
Conserve land.
Conserving land.
Education.
Wildlife habitat. Wildlife habitat. Education feeds into all of our pillars, but that's something that we kind of picked up. And, you know, if you think about wildlife corridors around here, the streams that run through our backyards, these power lines that run through, those are wildlife corridors or wildlife habitat. And what we're trying to do with the Conservancy is we're trying to figure out ways to make those places more inviting to native wildlife by introducing things like out at Fisher Farm, we've got the milkweed that we're doing, which is primary monarch butterfly habitat. So we've done plantings, we've protected areas out there so they don't come in and mow it. We're working with Duke Power to see if there's ways that we can take some of these corridors and enhance them. One of the things we're trying to do out at Fisher Farm is we call it rewilding, where we're getting rid of all that sterile fescue that's out there and trying to introduce back native plants. So that's kind of the big picture of my lands conservation hat, but now I'm going to put on my Trees Davidson hat, which is pretty sweaty because we were out last week. Remember it was, what, was 70 degrees on Saturday? We were out planting trees, and then Sunday it was 50 degrees. So we were working pretty hard. Trees Davidson started, I want to say about 9 years ago, and it was me kind of pinging around and saying, hey, is there any interest in this in our community? Does somebody else have this idea that we need to be planting trees? Well, thankfully we had none other than Dave Cable, that was the head of Tree Charlotte at the time. So we met with Dave, and I said, Dave, can we just copy everything that you do, including their logo? And he said, yeah. So we just changed the Charlotte to Davidson, and we pretty much built their model here, which is a public-private partnership, the land conservation group and the town. That's our public-private partnership. How does that work? Well, we've gotten some significant funding from the town. Before that, we had organizations like the Davidson Garden Club gave us $10,000 to plant trees. Other small groups have also supported us, but the town had that tree fund. I don't know if you heard about it, but we, with our help, passed a new tree ordinance. And that tree ordinance was in effect when they were doing the West Branch neighborhood. And that developer took down a bunch of trees that he wasn't supposed to take down. And the town dinged him on it. And I think the initial fine was going to be something like $1 million. And they settled for, I want to say, around $200,000, but that went into the town's tree fund. Well, so now that tree fund is coming back to Trees Davidson, and we've gotten some money from the town through a process to help us plant trees. This was our very first tree planting. There's the guy that helped me start it on the right, Rodney Graham, used to be a town board member. He was the guy that kind of helped me connect with Dave. And he sponsored his business. He's a home developer. He sponsored this planting on the west side, Lakeside Terrace, right? You're coming into town, and that first turn off there before the pond, that's the Lakeside Terrace. So all of those cherry trees on the right-hand side, we planted with this group, and the oaks on the other side of the sidewalk. And then other plantings, we went down into that neighborhood and planted cherry trees in the planting strip. So this is the kind of thing that we do. You can see it's a really great way to bring community members together. It's usually, you're talking about a couple hours of work. What we do is we get the town, if we're doing big plantings like this, to auger the holes so we don't have to dig them. That's a lot of work. And then, we plant them together. So it's really a lot of fun, and it's my favorite part about what we do. This is that sequoia that they did out at the Pines. And George has really been championing this, And he's the one that kind of worked on getting the designated arboretum. If you go out to the Pines, they already have trees nicely marked, okay? And they have some pretty good specimens out there. But George wanted to make it official. But this is where they, on Arbor Day, every year on Arbor Day, we'll have an event. And this is where they did their event out at the Pines. And you can see there's a lot of tree lovers out there. And we thank you for going all the way to pick up that tree. That's above and beyond.
He wore that same picture, and I said he was the only person I knew that had a polo shirt to go pick up a tree.
Pick up a tree.
20-year-old pickup.
Yeah.
Gordon, one of the other things we've done at the Pines are the chestnut trees that we've done.
Yeah.
Are you all doing anything with chestnuts in our tree station?
Yeah, so we're talking about that with, can I keep going? Okay. Joe and Angie Grooms are the ones, they found these chestnuts. And I think it's a hybrid. You know, the American chestnuts were pretty much wiped out. So there's this hybrid, but I think it's, as I understand, it's like 99%. And then and they've got them in pots, and they've talked to us about doing some maybe out in a grove, maybe at Fisher Farm or Abersham. So we're looking at that. I think it would be a great project. When Rebecca and I drove up to Maine this fall, we stayed at this place, and I'm looking at this tree, and it really looked pretty sorry. But sure enough, it was a chestnut tree. You can tell those chestnuts. And so I brought one home, but I don't know if that one, it's going to be like a lot of the American chestnuts where it's really not going to do well.
Dave, my brother is very involved with the American Chestnut Foundation and has done some of these plantings in North Carolina, growth type, trying to.
Yeah. I mean, it was a really critical tree. I mean, think about the song. I mean, there is so much of our culture that's wrapped around these trees that to think that something could come through and wipe them all out like that, it's really
I told you, Dave, Gordon. I have two in my yard at my place in the mountains.
Do you?
That they're trying to,
That's great, yeah.
So the little trees that George and Angie and
Mhm.
Joe have, can they be planted like at the Pines? Or are they invasives or?
No, I don't think they're not invasive.
Okay.
So I think they could be, but we just don't have a lot of record to go on, right?
We already have 3 pretty big ones now, next
Okay.
to the dog farm.
Okay,
We planted 10, 12 years ago, something like that.
and they're doing
When
okay?
I say pretty big, 15 feet.
Yeah, so sometimes you gotta try to use science to help you find maybe a variety that's going to do well, and maybe we can grow back our chestnut population. But then something else comes along, like the emerald ash borer, and that's killed a lot of our ash trees. So it's when we talk about climate change and all these things, that's really what it comes down to. How can we adapt to the changes that are happening in our.
Is that a sequoia?
That's the sequoia that you all planted out of the Pines, but what it might look like in, let's say, 20 or 30 years.
Is that a Dawn Redwood?
No, it's not a Dawn Redwood. Dawn Redwood is what we talked about, and that's what Mary Thornberry has in front of her house. That's a Dawn Redwood. Mary tells a great story about that tree. But we also have one right around here somewhere. Just right down here. Yeah.
And there's several in the camp.
Yeah. So this is just, I'm going to go fast now because I've been running my mouth too much, and these slides are too slow. This is, what some of this folks in this room can remember what Davidson used to be like. It was mostly farm fields, We think we had this great wooded, but a lot of it was farm field. But this gets back to how we can intentionally create a place for trees. All right, so that's how the canopy has changed in 90 years. Well, there was a gentleman that used to work at the college, Irvin Brawley. Irvin? And he used to have this rule: every tree he took down, he'd plant 3 more. And if you ever want a good story, get Irvin, put him in a golf cart, and let him ride around here, and he'll tell you about how this tree he got over here and he took it, like that big one right on the corner next to the admissions office, that Deodar cedar. That one he said he got from some other tree, and that's a beautiful tree if you look at it. You don't necessarily think of, you know, trees that are kind of funky like that, but it's I love those Deodar cedars.
Gordon, in 1989, when Hugo came through, we lost 300 trees on campus.
Yeah. So I wasn't here then, but a lot of you were, and Rebecca said it looked like a war zone. You know?
Well, I remember that night.
Yeah.
You know, that happened on early Friday morning. On Monday morning, Irving had a printout of all the trees. We were at Arboretum, printout of every tree and what had happened to them.
The next day?
Monday.
Oh, Monday?
Yeah.
Well, he knew those trees because he probably, if he hadn't planted them, you know, he would have been caring for them. So, and he loved trees. You know, this is the problem, is that Jim King was the man that came in after him, and we called Jim a turf guy because he got the grass looking really good. Okay, he got the irrigation in, and you know, it's nice to have that beautiful grass at graduation, right? Or in the spring, you know, when the kids are out there and they're getting the frisbees out and everything, it's beautiful. But it just really doesn't have a lot of benefit other than, you know, we like it. And I'd say trees and grass really don't go that well together, right? Because grass wants a lot of sunlight. So that's why, you know, I go out on some of these golf courses and they're taking trees down and going, don't do that, but they want grass. So that last slide was about climate change. So we'll go through this fast because a lot of you already know about this, but you know, what's happening in our neck of the woods and across the world is things are changing. That's the big thing about climate change. Things are changing. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. We know temperatures are going up, and we don't know how it's going to impact our tree canopy. So this is another reason why we really need to be intentional about what we're doing. Right tree, right place. You know, a lot of the trees along Concord Road that maybe aren't here anymore or are looking pretty rough. It's because the homeowners planted those trees. The town didn't plant those trees. And look at what happened. If you're on the wrong side of the street and the power lines are going through that, they have to come in there and they just shear up those trees. And then trees get old and die. So, you know, to me, that was kind of, if you look at some of those pictures, that was kind of part of what, to me, I loved about Davidson, is it had that feeling of that you're living in this canopy, underneath this canopy. The benefits of forest, we pretty much have covered all that. The benefits, I think, though, that's important to realize are so much more than just, you know, shade. The big thing that's happening now is this whole deal with storm runoff, right? And so that's why you see all these detention ponds that they have to put in the college, you know. They had to take down all those woods behind the soccer field, put in that detention pond. And I'm saying, why is that? Well, that's the way the county gets you to manage your storm runoff. Trees are the best way to manage storm runoff. Okay, so there's all of these benefits that really, a lot of times we're not aware of.
Gordon, the leaves collect the pollution, they take the pollution out of the air,
Right,
so
they
we get
sequester-
clean air.
they sequester
And the
carbon.
roots take out the pollutants, so it gives us clean water
That's
and
right.
saves the
They're
money
great
that matters.
filters.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, I mean, it's really, you know, amazing what trees do for us. And the fact that we don't have, I think, more of an appreciation for that. Okay, so the miracle of the trees. This is kind of what we talked about already. And it is a miracle, I think, because, you know, Talamay, I think, makes the argument that if we don't start to figure out how important nature is to us, well, then we're not going to be around, okay? The bees might go and the birds might go, but eventually we're going to go too. So we're going to have to figure this out. This is more of a slide about storm quality. That is a great way to absorb stormwater, okay? But guess what isn't? Yeah. Yeah. I apologize. There it is. There's the parking lot. So when they build a parking lot like that, they have to come in and figure out where all that water's going. Okay, that's the whole thing with those detention ponds. They got to funnel that water somewhere, and what happens is all this water goes rushing down, hundreds of thousands of gallons, and it's a whole other problem that we've just done. So we all know we got to have places to park our cars, but you know me, I'm a big bike rider. I'd rather everybody, we got e-bikes now. My aunt has an e-trike out at the Pines. If we can get everybody thinking like that, then we're going to be better off. Threat to our forest, our local forest. Okay, one of the things that we're working on at Trees Davidson that's pretty cool is we got a grant from Duke Power that's going to allow us to go on the west side and help people care for their maturing trees over there that don't have the money to do it. Because a lot of what needs to happen to our tree canopy is we need to care for it. And so we were able to get that grant, and so now we'll be able to go over there and help some folks that otherwise pretty much just have to, let it go and take their chances. If anybody's had to have tree work, you know how expensive that could be. And so that's a pretty good thing, I think, that Dave was able to pull together. Dave has gotten more grant money this past year. I got to tell you, I mean, we were lucky when we got Dave Cable, because that fella is going full speed ahead. So this is just more talking about, what happens when you're building homes, infill, when we come in, think about those lots across from the swimming hole. That was all woods, remember? Well, now look at it, right? So did they try to save any trees? Well, I don't know, maybe a couple. But it seems like a lot of the development around here, it's clear cut, plop homes in there and plop little tree seedlings, and that's their solution. And we wonder why we're losing so much canopy. And, just like they're seeing in Charlotte, and I've mentioned, some of these trees, they're not going to live forever. Unfortunately, Van parked in the wrong place that day. This is an interesting slide because it talks about our concentration here, where we have a lot of the willow oaks. You can see it. And so we've got a lot of the maples. So that when we talk about diversity, remember, we really want to try to diversify our canopy. And this gives you some of the concentrations that we have here in town. Okay, more things that can cause tree loss. Do you ever see those big, cool mushrooms when you're walking out here and you kind of wonder? Well, that can be a sign that that tree is starting to age out. They have different tools. This is just a big tree that was, I think, damaged in a storm. We had a tree. We used to live down off Ney Circle in the Polly's old house. I don't know if y'all remember down there, but we had a big white oak that fell on our house as we were trying to sell the house. So it took down 4 other trees on the way down. So, it can be expensive and it can do a lot of damage, these big trees. So that's why some people, I think, come in and say, I'm just going to take that tree down because I don't want to deal with it. And we saw a bunch of our neighbors do that.
Reached our limit here.
Okay, so let me see if I could go through this faster, Sterling, but this thing just isn't going fast. I have a couple slides at the end that I want to show you, but I haven't even really talked about some of the programs that we've done that have been really impactful here in town. But if I can get to this last slide, here we go. Boop, 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 boop. Here it's moving now. Treasure trees. I think Dave talked a little bit about treasure trees. Some of our tree plantings, okay, I told you my favorite thing, tree plantings, these are opportunities. And then these are a few pictures of folks that you should know. Alice, church member, is also a master naturalist. I took the same course with her. You should know that guy. He came out and helped us. Then these are some high school kids that came out and helped us. These are the day of service. These are our scouts that came out and helped us do stream cleanup. We adopted. And there's yours truly, Dave Cable, with some of our tree masters at our last tree planting. So this is kind of what I wanted to finish with. According to the study by Yale, there are over 3 million trees on Earth. However, these numbers are declining by over 15 billion per year. And we've lost over 45% of the trees on Earth since mankind began cutting them down. On the other hand, there are over 7.6 billion people on Earth, and this number is growing at approximately $80 million a year. So that picture there is Andrew Lovedale's children that I put up in this tree behind the Commons. I don't know if you know that American Beach back behind there. That's where I take our kids to go climb trees. And those kids had never climbed a tree. You can see Osas is not sure. I had to put them up there. But here's where I got to with all this. Gratitude. Gratitude for God's creation. God created an amazing place. I hope is that we can figure out with the gifts that God gave us how to manage nature, or God help us all. So I appreciate it. Sorry for the clicker problem, but I don't know if you have any questions, but I ran a little bit over, but hopefully you can still make it a church on time.
Well,
Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, I did bring a gift for Sterling. Since they say Sterling's a little long in the tooth, I brought him a long leaf pine seedling. There you go. Just what he wanted. And I have a magnolia and a cypress tree if anybody has a tree that they want to plant in their yard. Thank you again.
Yeah. Sure.